Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, August 17th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, foreign service families are used to uncertainty, but months after evacuation from parts of the Middle East, many are still waiting for answers that affect jobs, schools, and where they'll be living next. Plus, the biggest retirement mistakes usually happen when people make important decisions without fully understanding the consequences, and often before an employee leaves government. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. A new Pentagon pilot program will give some active duty service members a way to preserve their fertility before deployments, hazardous assignments, or long periods away from their families. Starting September 14th, eligible troops can be reimbursed up to $10,000 a year for egg freezing or $500 for sperm freezing under a 3-year program created by Congress. The Defense Health Agency will use the pilot to assess participation, costs, administrative burdens, and whether fertility preservation has an impact on military readiness and retention. Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen joins me with more. Rachel, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Terry.
This is really interesting. Who exactly is eligible for this program, and what do they need to do to qualify?
So the pilot is aimed at service members whose military duties could interfere with their ability to have kids later. So particularly those with upcoming combat deployments, orders to places that DoD lists as hazardous, so they would get hazard duty pay, or long periods of separation. So at least 6 months away from your spouse or the person you're dating, your domestic partner, what have you. So eligible troops can get paid back for fertility preservation services, covers up to $10,000 per year for egg freezing and up to $500 per year for sperm freezing. So you have to either already have your orders or you have to know that they're coming up within like a reasonable amount of time. So within about 4 months. And then all of those services that you get have to be within the 3-year period. So if you start the program, in the last 6 months or so of the 3-year period and you're still getting procedures done after those 6 months, they won't cover them anymore. So it has to be within this 3-year pilot.
Why has fertility preservation become such a particular concern for the military?
Military service can create circumstances that make family planning more difficult or unpredictable. Deployments can expose you to hazardous environments, hazardous waste, while, frequent moves, long separations, just how demanding military jobs are in general can also make people push family planning off until later. And so the idea behind the pilot is to give people another option to kind of preserve their choices and not force them to choose between serving or having kids.
The program allows troops to use civilian fertility clinics, including those outside the TRICARE network. How is that going to work in practice? Are there potential challenges with access or timing or even cost?
Yeah, the flexibility is important because fertility services aren't always available at every military treatment facility or through TRICARE in every location. So giving service members the option to use civilian providers frees up, those choices, but they still have to, navigate the same reimbursement process. And, you still have to be eligible in the same way as somebody going through an MTF would be. Timing can also be an issue because fertility preservation requires appointments and procedures and all of that have very specific timing, and they have to be coordinated around deployments, other family obligations, other military obligations. So you have to know that you're going into a stretch of time where this is possible.
The reimbursement levels are significantly different for egg freezing and sperm freezing. Do you have background information on why the cost differential is so high there?
Yeah, egg freezing is more involved, more expensive. It's more difficult than sperm preservation and retrieval, right? So it involves medications, you have to be monitored, ovarian stimulation, and then the actual egg retrieval procedure itself. Whereas, sperm cryopreservation is comparatively straightforward. So that $10,000 annual reimbursement cap is designed to cover, a much larger expense, although whether it covers all of it kind of depends on person-by-person basis and the services that they get.
Both of these gamete freezing processes would presumably wind up in an IVF process for the woman in these partnerships. Does the plan cover the cost of IVF?
No, it actually specifically says this doesn't. The pilot program isn't extended to other reproductive health procedures, including IVF. So if you want to do that, you still have to, go through the same process that you would do if you did it today or last year.
And if the partner is not pregnant by the time the 3-year pilot period is over, do they bear the cost then of continuing the maintenance of the frozen sperm or eggs?
Yeah, you would. So if your gametes are still frozen, right, and are still in storage, you would have to pay for that on your own. Shipping them elsewhere, if you move and you don't want to keep them wherever they are, you'd also have to pay for that out of pocket. But, it's designed to take the edge off at least a little bit, right, instead of having people foot the entire bill.
Well, that will be a really interesting feature of the 3-year pilot. So what will DHA be looking at in terms of readiness and retention impacts? Do they have a vision of what success looks like here?
Yeah, they're looking at whether or not this is a meaningful benefit for people without creating excessive costs or burdens for DoD, right? So can we offer this to people without bogging ourselves down in financial need or, a lot of red tape around it? So they'll be looking at things like participation, its effect on readiness and retention to see if it's worth it, but, also if people actually think that it's useful to have and if it's accessible to them. So if it demonstrates that cryopreservation helps the military retain people and people feel that it is supporting their family planning goals, then, it could provide the case for making that benefit permanent.
That's Federal News Network's Rachel Cohen. Rachel, thanks for bringing this up to us.
Yeah, anytime.
You can find Rachel's full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, foreign service families are used to uncertainty, but months after evacuations from parts of the Middle East, many are still waiting for answers that affect jobs, schools, and where they'll be living next. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The State Department moved hundreds of employees and family members out of the Middle East earlier this year. As those evacuations approach a key deadline, many families are still waiting to learn where they'll serve next and how to plan for the months ahead. John Dinkelman, president of the American Foreign Service Association, joins me now to discuss the impacts of this on the workforce and the State Department. John, thank you so much for being here this morning. I really appreciate you joining me.
It's a pleasure.
We're in an interesting situation now. Hundreds of foreign service employees and their family members have now spent months in a kind of professional and personal limbo after being evacuated from posts across the Middle East when the war with Iran began. Help us understand what an evacuation actually looks like for a foreign service family. Where do they go?
Well, evacuations are important, of course, whether it's for something as temporary as a tornado or a hurricane hitting a country, or something long-term like the war that we're presently experiencing. The State Department needs a way to remove its non-essential people and family members from places that are in danger. They are theoretically and usually moved back to the United States, which we refer to in that terminology as a safe haven, where we wait for determination as to whether and when we can return. The strange situation about this evacuation is that it is so broad for a large region. it was so unexpected with all of these people not being evacuated before we initiated hostilities and with the indeterminate nature of what's going on.
It's one thing to pack up your suitcase and move somewhere else for a week. But in this case, they've been gone for months. They've left behind their belongings. We're in August. Kids are getting ready to go back to school. Pets are in limbo. How do they take care of all of those kinds of things?
Well, in the same way that we often have been told to have go bags ready to go in case there's an emergency here in the United States, it is part of the Foreign Service mentality that you must always be ready at a moment's notice to leave and prioritize everything that you have in such a way that if you need to go with only one suitcase or two suitcases or perhaps a pack out of a few 100 pounds, that you're able to measure and react quickly. In this case, of course, these people were given no notification whatsoever.
And now this decision and these evacuations are approaching the department's 180-day limit. What decisions are they still waiting for?
Well, the big decision, of course, is whether or not the actual locations will revert to their prior accompanied status. That looks increasingly unlikely given the situation and the on-again, off-again nature of hostilities. And so what we're seeing is a lot of frustration on the part of these people who are not being told that the kids are not going to be going home, or at least back to their assignment, and rather need to start school in some places in the United States this week. And so that leads to a lot of desperation on the part of these people who are innocent victims from our side of the war.
You mentioned families and family decisions. In most cases, are the families evacuated, but the Foreign Service member themselves remains on station?
Yes. In most cases, the individual who is working at the embassy is essential. I mean, let's face it, if somebody's job can be done by the United States, why are we putting them there anyway? So the family members, of course, of those people are the ones who are separated and sent to a location where they feel they can best be supported. While many of those families do come to the Washington, D.C. area, anticipating that if the employee ever gets back, it will be to Washington, many others simply go home to grandma and grandpa or to where there's a family network to support them throughout the United States.
John Dinkelman is president of the American Foreign Service Association. John, AFSA recently issued a statement expressing concerns about the current situation we're describing here. What's at the top of AFSA's list? What are you most worried about here?
Oh, the safety of our people, unquestionably, particularly the employees who are still in harm's way. It seems evident that unlike most other hostilities we've ever engaged in, that our embassies and consulates overseas are increasingly becoming a target of choice of our enemy. And so to send individuals back to these locations, much less family members, would be essentially putting them in the crosshairs of a target that the enemy is going to utilize. The people who are there, of course, it opens an entirely different question as to why you would be putting diplomats in the middle of a war zone. We usually, when we saber rattle and we send in fleets, the next step is to remove our diplomats, much less their families. But that was entirely ignored back in February and March.
Does this have the potential to become like military assignments that are unaccompanied, and that's the standard assignment?
Well, the State Department has always had unaccompanied positions, and we fill those readily with individuals who are willing to go. At some point, though, we're going to run out of places that we designate as unaccompanied, and we'll soon become a foreign service of single people.
So what does a situation like this mean for the effectiveness of the State Department's diplomatic mission? You've got Foreign Service officers who are worried about their families, who are in danger themselves. What are you hearing from the State Department, and what are you seeing on the ground in terms of the effectiveness of the folks who are left on station?
Well, unfortunately, we on the Employee Association collective bargaining side of the house are hearing absolutely nothing from the State Department, for they refuse to even acknowledge our existence, which is a sad state of affairs. What we are hearing on the ground from our people, of course, is that these skeletal staffs there at posts are burdened with a trifecta. They need to, first and foremost, see to the needs of any American citizens who find themselves in harm's way, serving the consular needs of our own people. They need to liaise with the host government If we have allies, we need to work with them, and we'll do that in their capitals. And finally, they need to secure the facilities, which increasingly are becoming targets.
What about the long-term effects of something like this on the State Department's workforce? Does this mean that people are more likely to seek more peaceful assignments, to return home, leave the Foreign Service altogether?
Yeah, more the latter. As I sat there at Dulles Airport greeting the scores of plane loads of people being evacuated in March, the words I repeatedly heard from people were decoy or pawn, that we were basically set up to sit in a war zone of our own making. And it's long been an understanding that the Department of State would get you, and more importantly, your family, out of harm's way before anything happened. And unlike the situations of the early 1990s, where Saddam Hussein attacks Kuwait and our people at the embassy in Kuwait find themselves to be sitting ducks, this all was our own doing. And why in the world the State Department was not allowed to remove its people, or chose not to remove its people, is something that will stick in the craw of the workforce for a long time to come.
The State Department is attempting to open new recruitments for Foreign Service officers. What impact do you think these kinds of situations will have there?
I think it'll cause a lot of people to rethink. Those who prioritize their family's safety and well-being and unity will have to take that into consideration. We are in desperate need of patriotic Americans who will serve our nation and exercise the diplomatic element of our national power. Unfortunately, and paradoxically, I think the administration is constricting the lens by which they're going to hire people in the future because of their own actions.
Do you think with families who have returned to the States with kids in tow and they're looking at the beginning of a school year, are they more likely to say, we're just going to stay here, we're going to get the kids enrolled, we're going to settle, we're going to see this out, and then we'll take up what comes next?
Exactly. Individuals after 6 months are saying the kids have had enough. We'll just stay here in Fresno or Seattle or wherever they might be and see this one through and try to rebuild their lives after this tremendous thing has been thrown in their way.
And at this point, what does a good solution look like from AFSA's perspective, both in this current situation with families who've been evacuated from the Middle East and longer term for the Foreign Service workforce? What would you hope to see in future policies?
I would hope the department would follow existing policies of basically determining that individuals who came to a post with an understanding that their families could go with them and that they could do so in relative safety could choose to break the assignment. In normal times, there's usually a plethora of individuals who are willing to go in and replace them. Of course, the Department of State made the mistake of firing over 1,300 people last year. They've depleted the resources at the very ranks that they would use to bolster up these posts. And so now we're in this challenge.
John Dinkelman is president of the American Foreign Service Association. John, thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
Thank you very much.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, Congress may be on recess, but the campaign for governing power is still underway. But first, the biggest retirement mistakes usually happen when people make important decisions without fully understanding the consequences. And that often happens before an employee leaves government. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Federal retirement is full of choices involving pensions, health benefits, Social Security, and the Thrift Savings Plan. Many employees don't discover the consequences of those decisions until after they've made them. Retirement expert Tammy Flanagan joins me now with some perspective on how to prepare. Tammy, so great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Terry. It's great to be back.
Talking about retirement issues, we're still hearing that the administration continues to offer the DRP program in some places. What are you seeing in retirement numbers kind of across the board these days?
Yeah, it seems like all of a sudden, just in the last week or two, we've been getting a lot of calls from people that are retiring either September 30th, which is kind of last minute, but they're still calling for help, or the end of the year. So I agree. Yeah, we're still seeing DRPs and people leaving early and people trying to make this last minute decision about what to do, sometimes with 2 weeks to decide.
Well, you're right. September 30th is right around the corner. And it feels like last year we were talking about September 30th and such a big deal. As people are looking at that date, though, and it's kind of logical, the end of the fiscal year, what kinds of questions are at the top of their mind? Are they ready to make that kind of transition?
Yeah, some of them are because, as you know, some people plan for retirement throughout their career, which we should do. But there's some folks who really haven't given it much thought until they got this little golden egg in front of them saying, hey, you can retire 5 or 7 years sooner than you had planned or that you were even eligible before. And so now what do you want to do? And it's very enticing to take that, incentive to go out early, especially if you're going to get a payment, a buyout type of payment. But are you ready? And that's not just financially. Are you mentally ready for this transition? And can you afford it? Some people think they can until they realize some of the things that may not be as obvious, such as the cost of living adjustment doesn't kick in under FERS until you're 62. So if you're leaving at 50, that's 12 years before you get a pay raise. And that's a long time to wait for more money to come in.
Well, retiring feds are sort of a captive market. Even federal agencies, of course, are offering retirees training. What's the difference between a good retirement training preparation and a session that just sort of walks you through what your retirement benefits are?
Yeah, we've seen it all, and we've heard it all from different agencies where we've come in and presented training classes. And I found that sometimes, the easy way to do that is not always the best. You'll have folks out there who will give free training in an effort to gain clients. Perhaps, I'm a financial advisor and I'm looking for clients. I'll just go in and give them a briefing. But yet when the questions come in about, how much service credit is going to be allowed, or do I have to pay a deposit for this? They're not benefits experts. So they either don't know and will say they don't know, or they'll give an answer that they think is correct and it's not accurate. So you got to be really careful when you're attending a training class to know who it is that's presenting it. How much experience do they have? Are they benefits people? Are they financial planners? There's a big difference between the two. So one way to test that is to ask a question that you know the answer to and see what they give you as the response. And if they don't know the answer, are they going to give you a reference as where you can find out? So accuracy is utmost important because we don't need more rumors going around. There's enough of those amongst the employees themselves. So be sure that the training is qualified. Somebody's qualified to present it.
Should pending retirees look for training offered by their employing agency, or should they go out on their own and look for private sector training?
Well, if the agency's offering a training course, absolutely, take advantage of that. Don't bypass that. You don't know how many times I've walked into a classroom where someone will say, well, I've been here 40 years. I know all this. They told me I need to come. And at the end of the day, they'll apologize and say, oh, you told me some things I didn't know, because, there's little nuances in our retirement system that one little thing can either save you some money or avoid you from making a mistake. So I think taking advantage of agency training, usually it's vetted in some way so that you can generally be sure that someone's coming in that's going to really provide adequate and quality training. But if you don't have that, and there's a lot of federal employees who are never afforded a formal training program, there's a lot of places to go get it. Whether you're going to the agencies themselves, TSP has wonderful online learning classes. Some of them are live, some are recorded. Social Security has YouTube channel, so does OPM. So even within those agencies themselves that administer the benefits, there are places to learn, whether it's just going to the website and reading or listening to an online class. Those are wonderful, wonderful opportunities. And then I also see outfits like NITP. They provide online training on a regular basis, monthly, by experts who have been doing this for decades. So, there's places like that you can go to that you feel confident and comfortable that the information you're getting is good, accurate, and it's going to be helpful, give you some things that you can do now to prepare for that transition.
Tammy Flanagan is a principal with Retire Federal. Tammy, you mentioned the nuances in the federal retirement system. Let's talk about some of those. Where do you see people either be most surprised or make the biggest mistakes by not considering those nuances?
Yeah, there's a lot of decisions that employees have to make when they retire, and sometimes the obvious answer is not always the right one. For instance, if I'm married, I have to consider survivor benefits for my spouse. And oftentimes I'll hear someone say, well, my spouse is also a federal employee, or they work in the private sector. They're going to have their own retirement. So I don't see why I need to even consider leaving them a survivor annuity. Well, while there's two of you, you got all these sources of income between Social Security and pensions and retirement savings. But down the road, which could be decades down the road, when there's one of you, can that single person survive on half of the Social Security and without any of your retirement? And in some cases, without your health insurance, because one of the things that conveys with a survivor benefit is the ability for a non-federal spouse to maintain health insurance, or even a federal spouse who may not be eligible for their own retirement benefit. So that's a big one. I see that a lot. Other decisions have to do with life insurance. A lot of people want to cancel their life insurance when they retire, and they don't realize that some of that life insurance will convey free of charge once you're 65 or older. And a lot of our retirees are already 65, so they would have free coverage if they didn't cancel it. So, there's some things you really want to know ahead of time to avoid missing out on an opportunity or making a mistake that you're later going to come to regret. And you can't go back and change it. Some of these decisions are permanent.
A lot of people and a lot of our discussions focus on whether or not folks are financially ready to retire. Do they have all their financial ducks in a row? But you mentioned something at the beginning of our conversation that I think is also really important and often gotten wrong, which is, are you personally and emotionally and psychologically ready to retire? How did people get to the point of really being able to answer that?
Well, I think someone who's been planning on retirement for many years, really preparing for it, has been thinking about that and has been making secret plans in their mind or with their family of, here's the things we're going to do initially when I retire. Here's what my retirement life is going to look like. Here's what I want for that. But someone who's facing a kind of a knee-jerk decision where they're just all of a sudden presented with the opportunity to retire, and they really hadn't been giving it a lot of thought, at least not for the present moment. Sometimes that can come as a mental shock when you go into retirement. First of all, you're waiting for that first check and you have some financial concerns until everything falls into place. So that can be very stressful. And then you haven't planned on, how much money do I really need? So am I mentally ready to move on to another career if I need to fill in the gaps? Or if I can afford to retire, what was my plan? Am I just going to sit and watch TV and clean the closets and do that? Or do I really have some things I really want to get into and learn some new hobbies perhaps, or some new trades? There's a lot of things you can do, but you gotta make an effort. There's not a supervisor now telling you, here's what you need to do tomorrow. So you have to make your own plan.
That's right. Maybe you find out golf isn't quite as much fun as you thought it was going to be.
Not when you can do it 7 days a week. As fun as that might sound.
So if someone is approaching the point where they really do need to think seriously about retirement, what information would you want them to absolutely have in hand before they make the decision to leave government service?
Yeah. How much time do you have? There's a lot of things that you want to have in place. First and foremost, make sure that you have documentation of all of your federal service, so that if somebody comes back to you and says, well, you only have 19 years of service and you really have 30, can you prove that? Can you say, well, here's my personnel action statement showing when I was hired. Here's the one when I left. Here's the one when I was rehired. Keep records of your personnel information. You can make a copy of your electronic official personnel folder in most cases. There's some intelligence agencies, of course, where that's not necessarily possible, but you can certainly ask for specific proof that I've done this work. I've had law enforcement people who didn't get credit for being law enforcement officers when they moved from one agency to the other. So at the last minute, they're scrambling, trying to get that proof in place so that they can actually retire under those provisions. So be responsible for your own career. Don't expect someone else to do it for you. Chances are they will, but if there's that one important piece of information that's missing, you can be, if nothing else, stressed out until you find it, or maybe at a loss for a certain amount of service. So to me, that's one of the most important things we can do. And then review that application. We now have the online retirement application. It's not as easy to review ahead of time, but those paper applications are still at opm.gov. So get your immediate retirement application, look it over, make sure you know how you're going to answer those questions, because there are some decisions you have to make. So, be prepared, think about this, get the training that you might need, do the research ahead of time, and don't rely on something that your coworker did or that your best friend did, because that may not be the right decision for you.
Tammy Flanagan is a principal with Retire Federal. Tammy, thanks so much for joining me. Always such great guidance.
Thanks, Terry. Good to be here.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, Congress may be on recess, but the campaign for governing power is still underway. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Congress may be out of session, but the clock is still running on fiscal 2027 funding. As lawmakers look towards spending deadlines and a crowded legislative agenda, this year's primary elections are also offering clues about who may wield influence in the next Congress. Bloomberg Government Deputy News Director Lauren Duggan is here with a look ahead. Lauren, great to have you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It actually is recess time on the Hills, but there's still stuff happening. Let's talk maybe about a combination of things, what they're doing in the districts and what's on the agenda ahead. So let's start at the big picture. I know there are still conversations happening. What are you hearing most maybe about where we are on the continuing resolution for 2027?
Well, it's amazing that we're talking about the continuing resolution in August rather than in the depths of September with a shutdown looming right in front of us. But before they left town, the Senate sent the House by a 90-6 with one present vote, a continuing resolution that would keep the government open until December 11th, well past the election, give them time to come back from the midterms and figure out what to do beyond that. So what we're hearing, one of the House members that was around this week, Virginia Fox, I think she was the pro forma person on Thursday, told one of our reporters that she thinks they can do that pretty quickly and on a bipartisan basis when they get back, whether that's at 1 week they're here in early September or after Labor Day. There's certainly a path you could see to that. Despite some people having issues with some of the language in there, it seems like overall that measure looks likely to proceed when they come back.
Well, that might be a sigh of relief for most people in the federal government, given last year's memories. Are there any concerns about getting to agreement on the terms?
Well, I think if they had to go through the Rules Committee, which Virginia Fox chairs, they might have the issue they've run into all these times where those tend to be party line votes and you need the Republicans on board. And if enough Republicans have enough issue with some language in there, that could water down support. Democrats at the moment seem on board. Enough Republicans would seem on board. You could probably get that 2/3 support and get it over. Things that have caused some concern, there's language in there around the products under a hemp definition, which has brought in a lot of discussion about THC drinks, THC products. There's some people who don't want that extended the way the CR does. There's also language in there around OMB grant-making authority, delaying a rule that they had put out. But even some conservatives in the Senate had said, it's only a month. It's not that big of a deal. We can come back to it. So people could find fault, but at the moment, I don't know that those faults are lining up to be enough to tank it.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for that optimistic take. And when we are thinking about other sorts of resourcing bills, Reconciliation 3.0 is still in the conversation. What's the latest there?
It is. The Senate had talked about doing that before they left, with Ron Johnson, the Senate budget chair, wanting to push forward with that. They talked well into Friday night, becoming Saturday morning, and decided to hit the pause button, come back and do it then. They had told the president there just wasn't the right alignment of things there. One of the reasons they're pushing this is the Save America Act, which is what the president wants to see on voter ID and proof of citizenship to register to vote, which there is support for in Capitol Hill. He also wants mail-in ballot restrictions that haven't gotten wind yet. But their hope is to use that budget reconciliation process to move things that comply with budget rules, so money, grants to states, things like that. But they couldn't get the first part of that, the budget resolution, over the line before they left. So they would have to come back do that and then write and pass the actual bill that would provide that funding for that and for DOD and for other things. So you can see a lot of obstacles to getting that done. It was a tall lift to do it if they had gotten done before recess. And, the later it goes into the year, the closer you get to midterms, it might become difficult for them to do that. But they're still discussing it at the very least.
One of the things we're hearing from members who are back in their districts is a lot of conversation still back on Reconciliation 1.0, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. If they're still having trouble at this point selling the benefits of that, does that cause people maybe to put a little bit of a hold button on 3.0?
Perhaps. I mean, the reason you use this process is so you can get a party line vote, which is what unites 1, 2, and 3 under this process. 2, by the way, was the funding for ICE and CBP to get that Homeland Security funding through. Republicans usually talk about the working families tax cuts rather than the One Big Beautiful Bill. When they talk about that bill, you've seen events, including with the president, over no tax on tips, the language that was in there to cover, to prevent taxation on some tips. There was over the overtime provision, Social Security provision. So I think we'll see a lot of discussion about that and perhaps using Democratic positions as a counter to what they did there. Of course, Democrats are going to run too on the cuts that they see to spending on Medicaid and the changes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that was a fight in light of the Farm Bill when they were debating that before they left. So people are going to run on that bill on one way or another, but the process is not what's standing out on that front. It really is some of the policy decisions that they either want to promote or use as a cudgel against Republicans in some cases.
Lauren Duggan is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Lauren, even as we're talking about all of these resourcing conversations coming up, elections keep happening, lots and lots of primary elections. And I thought maybe while things on the Hill are a little slower, we'd take the opportunity to get a quick sense of what all of the results in the primaries so far mean. One of the trends has been youth versus incumbency, and a lot of older incumbents losing in their primaries to younger challengers. What are you seeing and hearing about the impacts of that?
I mean, change is often what pushes in elections. We've seen that a lot. One of the things we saw last week was John Larson, 78-year-old, been there for a long time, former member of leadership, lost his seat to a challenger, I think 30 years his junior. And that one wasn't much about the kind of Democratic socialists versus establishment. That one really seemed to be more about positioning and age and things like that. So we've seen that. We've seen other examples of it. We probably will hear more discussion of this too coming up in light of who's running committees next year. That has been a theme in Democratic politics of, a lot of times you got to be chairman by being around for a while, having seniority, safer seats. And some people want to shake that up and have younger members get the chance to wield gavels. And we've seen some of that with, for example, Robert Garcia, second term, fairly young former mayor who's now the ranking Democrat on the Oversight Committee. Next year could be the chief antagonist to the Trump administration on the Hill with that gavel. So that is a dynamic that we've seen play out.
Certainly, not only the changes in incumbency, but a lot of incumbents not returning for re-election. So that really could shuffle the leadership deck, right?
It really could. I mean, the leadership decks at the top of the parties may stay pretty stable. If the Republicans were to lose the majority, I think Mike Johnson would have some decisions to make around that. But, some committee leaderships will shake out. A couple of members who lost had subcommittee chairs. John Larson was one. Diana DeGette earlier this year, who had a health ranking membership on the Energy and Commerce Committee. So the losses now will create some openings and just other churn and change as people retire or move on to other offices. That's going to create opportunities, too, for people to move around.
One of the other trends, and you mentioned Democratic Socialists, is the party edges against the party centers. And what are you seeing there? Is it more towards the radical wings of the parties, or are voters in the primaries moving back to the center?
It seems like it depends on where you look. I mean, the case last week in Wisconsin, the governor's race, which isn't about Congress as much, but there you had a Democratic Socialist candidate, Francesca Hong, who seemed to have the early edge. And then the current governor backed Crowley, who's the Milwaukee County executive, and he surged to win that. He was way down in the polls and moved up to win that by just enough. I mean, it was close, but +1 is what gets you there. So he won there. And then you look into the Michigan Senate race where Abdul Al-Sayed beat Haley Stevens in that contest. He was more of the left-wing candidate. She was seeing more of the establishment, and he edged her out in that race. And, people were already looking at Fox News polls at the end of the week that had Mike Rogers, the Republican candidate, up above him there, whereas some other polls have shown different results in other states. So we'll have to see how those races play out and what that means going into December. We have seen Republicans talk a lot about socialism, and they go and talk about communism as well, where I think some of these candidates would make distinctions there. But, that's going to be a big theme going into this election on the Republican side, talking about some of the things they've done and what they think Democrats might do as some of these socialist candidates do gain traction.
Well, then thinking about the parties more generally, R's and D's, what are the trends starting to look like in terms of who might take control of either or both chambers in the midterms?
The margins are tight in both chambers today. So, it wouldn't take a huge leap for the Democrats to win one or the other. The House, you have to, put an asterisk there because the map has changed in many states. The redistricting that happened in California and Texas had the most seats at play, but there's also been moves to get one seat more for Republicans in places like Missouri, maybe one seat more for the Democrats in Utah. So the map is different. You have to figure that out. I don't know, like Greg Giroux, our elections expert, I don't know that you'll see the wave that you saw in past years where maybe 30 seats have changed hands just because of some of the structural things and the fact that the Democrats are pretty close to Republicans now in the House. In the Senate side, there's some places Democrats really need to hold. Michigan is a key one, Georgia, where they seem good. Then they have to start winning seats in terrain that's less favorable to them, whether it's knocking off Susan Collins in Maine, picking up North Carolina looks pretty good. But then, you start talking about places like Texas, Ohio, and where they haven't had as much luck in recent years, but they think they might have the candidates and the opportunity here to win. So I think it could be a nail biter on election night in the Senate for sure, maybe even in the House, but it'll be a lot to watch between now and then for sure.
So we'll keep our towels and our sunscreen handy, but keep our eyes on the headlines as well. Lauren Duggan is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Thanks so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Defense Logistics Agency's 5-year IT modernization journey reached an important milestone earlier this summer. DLA moved its catalog off a 35-year-old COBOL-based system and onto a new modern platform. For more on the agency's latest IT modernization achievement, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller caught up with Daryl Roberts, DLA's Chief Information Officer.
This cataloging system supports all the NINs, the NSNs for not just the Department of War, whole of government, so GSA, and our NATO partners. And so this is the central repository that really fuels our ability from a supply chain perspective to do resupply across all the domains. So what that means for DLA is we now have a system that will allow us to process faster. A lot of our manual processes that we do today in our old Cobalt system, we can automate. And then from a department perspective and a NATO perspective, it streamlines their ability to do entry as well. So there were some things that we wanted to do in support of NATO and support of the department we couldn't actually put into the Cobalt system. They're now inherently there with our commercial ERP.
Walk me through. This started several years ago, I imagine. This has been a huge lift. What's it mean to move from this off of this 35-year-old system? You probably had run it in parallel. Give me kind of the build up to the launch.
I'd say governance first. So the coordination with our partners, our stakeholders across Department of War, whole of government, NATO. That's been the hard part. The technology part is pretty straightforward. But the coordination of those integrations, the systems that have to feed our cataloging system and that our cataloging system has to feed, that's been the complexity that we've had, the timing. There's a lot going on in the world today. You talk about Operation Epic Fury, other things that we're supporting, that our NATO partners are supporting, and other whole of government partners. So we've had to do a lot of coordination and governance. So partnering with OSW, ANS, helping lead the way as a sponsor has been a key for us as well. But starting back in 2021, 2022 is when we really started the IT planning effort, and it's culminated this year in terms of what we've been able to do.
Are you running the old system in parallel with the new system for several weeks, several months? The really celebration probably is when you can turn off that old system and say, we're off of our legacy technical debt. Give me the next few steps.
Yeah, so we are actually off the old system. So we are fully live, running every single transaction on the new platform. We'll keep the old system available. We won't decommission. For about 60 to 90 days, we'll start the decommissioning process once we're stable. But the next steps after that, it's continuous lifecycle management, right? So Deploying is step one. That's the first day of the journey. Now it's how do we continue to enhance, improve? How do you apply AI, automation further into the process? And we don't want to get back into a technical debt situation. So we're going to manage this from a life cycle perspective.
Anytime you do a systems modernization, it's usually three pieces, right? It's the data side. You mentioned that a little bit. It's the integration, which is I'll throw in that data bucket. It's the technology itself, and then it's the how do we guard against scope creep, right? Everyone says, "Oh, can we add this? Can we add this?" And then all of a sudden, you never get to that even close to the finish line because you keep adding more capabilities. Let's start with what the user is going to see differently with this new system, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about how you guarded against some of these other challenges.
I think they'll see a more commercial look and feel. So cataloging, keeping track of items, that's not unique to the Department of War. Industry does that every day. So I think a big part of going to this commercial platform, how do we operate more commercially? Because the things that we're buying from a department is coming from the commercial world. And so I think that's part of our life cycle management so that we don't get into customization like we typically do. So we have a configure first, customize last mindset. What is so unique about our requirement that I must build that custom code as opposed to if it's configuration, I'm just turning on a different feature that the user would like to utilize.
Generally, how much out of the box were we able to do from the commercial system, and maybe percentage, 50%, 80%, 99%, and how did you guard against that idea of let's add more features and customize?
The customization piece is more driven by law, regulation, things of that nature, national security. We didn't do that within our ERP, so we had a low-code platform, and that's where we really focused the customization. Because customization is not a bad thing. Even commercially, they customize commercial products. It's how you do the technical architecture so that it's not costly and you don't break the commercial software platform that you're on. So, of course, there's a lot of customization because of the unique nature of the defense, but that's not within our commercial platform itself. We did that through an integration with the low-code platform.
This is rolled out. This is now being used. You still, as you said, you still have the old system available just in case. You mentioned let's not get back into that technical debt situation. What are you doing from a modernization standpoint? Do you have a plan to add more capabilities? Is it the type, and this leads into the broader conversation that I think we'll also have.
The governance hasn't stopped, so we have a functional governance board that provides those priorities. What capabilities do they need? We have a governance board that internal from an IT perspective that will evaluate those criteria. We work with the partner. I hold executive level meetings to understand the roadmap of our technical partners moving forward. And that's going to be the process by which we do not allow a lot of customization. If we do customize, do it in a thoughtful, sustainable way. But as much as possible, it's also about, well, why are we doing those things? Is it necessary for mission success? Is it compliance? Or is it something that we've done for the last 15 years and someone said, hey, let's just keep doing it? Well, no, let's not keep doing it if it's not helping with the transaction.
I got to ask, how big is your list, and how often do people add to your list of wants, needs, desires?
There's always a list. There's always a list. That lets us know that we're actually providing capabilities that matter, that move the mission forward. I think it's just important to be able to deliver those in a meaningful, sustainable way.
I know you haven't turned off the old system yet, but are you going to celebrate in some way? Is there going to be some sort of toast, party, cake?
We had an initial celebration for the go live with the team up in Battle Creek, but I think the real celebration will be, a year from now when we're in a more sustainable mode. We've had some lessons learned. We're implementing things on the fly. I think we're just going to have a sustained celebration in terms of we don't have to have a transformational effort again. It's just how we live.
Speaking of transformational efforts, this is a part of a bigger effort. You mentioned a modernization plan to basically fully modernize by 2030. You mentioned this idea of, but during COVID and for other things, you've had to move faster. And you've said you should be 120-day deliveries, 90-day deliveries, 60-day deliveries. Where are you today with that kind of transformation plan, and how are you lowering that delivery schedule?
We have buckets of success. Where I've seen we've been able to really move to that days and weeks concept, it's going to be with AI and automation. So building our data fabric, that's really the hard part, getting that established. Well, we're well on our way of doing that. That's actually taking some months as opposed to days or weeks, but we're measuring our progress from that perspective. But once you have the data fabric in place to be able to do the automation and AI enablement, that's where we can do days and weeks. We've seen where we call it vibe coding, where we've went to different commands, sat with them for a day or two, and then said, hey, is this what you're looking for in terms of capability? Yes, exactly, but also add this, also add that. So we've been able to move faster in that AI automation realm based on that days and weeks. Of course, when you do major ERP transformation, that's going to take years of planning. But I think we're at a point at DLA within the next 12 to 18 months where we'll have that baseline, right? A lot of our major transformation we started in 2020, 2021, we'll have the baseline complete. So now that will be our normal operating model of, hey, let's deliver a capability in days and weeks versus the years it took to establish that baseline.
Daryl Roberts is the Chief Information Officer of the Defense Logistics Agency. He was speaking there with Federal News Network's Executive Editor, Jason Miller. You can find Jason's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.